Delta Airlines owns more Boeing 757s than any airline on the planet. And Boeing shut down the 757 production line for good back in 2004. Every single 757 flying for Delta right now is a plane that can never be swapped out for a new one because brand new ones simply don't exist. And the secondhand 757 market, thin, aging, and shrinking every single year. So Delta is sitting on a fleet of jets it can never replace like for like, worth billions of dollars, with no production line, a dwindling parts supply, and honestly, no obvious successor waiting in the wings. This is the story of how the world's largest 757 operator ended up flying an aircraft nobody makes anymore, and why the bill for keeping it airborne could run past $12 billion. Let's rewind to the early 1980s. Boeing had just rolled out a narrow body built to do something almost nothing else could: fly full transatlantic routes while still landing on short, tight runways at smaller airports. Most airlines used it as a domestic workhorse. Delta looked at it and saw something bigger. By the time Boeing closed the order book, over 1,000 757s had been built across the world. Delta alone operates well over 100 of them today, more than any other carrier after absorbing Northwest's fleet in 2008 and never fully letting the type go. Nobody else comes close. Delta's first 757s entered service in the mid-1980s, and instead of phasing the type out as newer narrow bodies arrived, the airline kept adding to it, using mergers and secondhand acquisitions to grow the fleet even as Boeing's production numbers slowed to a trickle. So why has Delta clung to a jet Boeing walked away from over 20 years ago? Range, mostly. The 757 can fly from short domestic-length runways in cities like Bangor or Shannon and still cross the Atlantic nonstop, a combination no current Boeing or Airbus narrow-body fully replicates. Smaller markets that can't fill a wide-body but still want a nonstop to Europe rely on exactly that trick. For nearly 2 decades, it worked brilliantly. And Delta didn't just keep flying these jets, it rebuilt them, retrofitting cabins with lie-flat business seats and updated interiors so a 40-year-old airframe still feels current in the front rows. While Delta kept investing in the type, the rest of the industry moved on. And the reason comes down to economics. Twin-engine narrow bodies built after the 757 burned meaningfully less fuel per seat, and Boeing's own newer jets were tuned for shorter, higher-frequency domestic routes rather than range-stretching transatlantic missions. The 757's job, the one thing it does uniquely well, turned out to be a small enough niche that Boeing never built a true successor. The 737 AMAX-10 doesn't have the range. The 787 has the range, but far too much capacity and cost for a thin transatlantic route. So Boeing simply let the 757 line close in 2004 after building 1,050 of them and never replaced it. So here's where that $12 billion figure comes from. Nobody at Delta has stamped that exact number on a press release, but stack up the pieces and it's not hard to see how it adds up. Start with the retrofit program. Delta has spent well over $1 billion recabining its 757 fleet with new premium seating, and every aircraft that goes through the shop comes out looking new while the airframe underneath keeps aging. Then there's the fuel penalty. Multiply the efficiency gap against a modern narrow body by more than 100 aircraft, by however many more years Delta keeps them flying, and the extra fuel spend alone runs into the billions. Then add maintenance. Some of Delta's 757s are pushing 30 years old, and older jets need more frequent heavy checks, more engine overhauls, and increasingly hard to source parts since Boeing stopped building new ones 2 decades ago. Delta has gotten smart about it, buying up retired airframes for spares, but that's still a cost nobody flying a current production jet has to carry. Finally, there's resale value, or the near lack of it. The secondhand 757 market is thin and shrinking, and buyers increasingly want jets Boeing still supports with fresh parts. Unlike a 737 or an A321, Delta can't simply lease out or sell off the 757s it no longer needs on a given route. It either keeps flying them somewhere in the network, or it eats the loss outright, which is exactly why the retired airframe teardown strategy has become such a core part of the plan. Stack the retrofit bill, the fuel penalty, the rising maintenance on an aging fleet, and a resale market that's fading fast, and a $12 billion lifetime cost for keeping this fleet flying into the next decade stops sounding like clickbait and starts looking like arithmetic. The part that turns this from a spreadsheet problem into an actual dilemma is that Delta can't just trade these jets in for something newer because nothing that does the same job is being built. The 737 AMAX-10 was supposed to eventually take over some of the shorter transatlantic routes, but it's still working through certification delays years behind Boeing's original schedule, and even once cleared, it simply doesn't have the range to do what a 757 does. The Airbus A321XLR is closer, with genuinely long range, and Delta does have some on order, But deliveries have been slow, and the type doesn't yet exist in Delta's fleet at anywhere near 757 numbers. And going back to Boeing for more 757s isn't on the table at all. The tooling is gone, the supplier network moved on to other programs decades ago, and there has never been a serious signal that Boeing would restart a line that closed under its own economics. While Delta leaned into the 757, most of the industry treated it as a fading legacy type. United and American each still fly meaningful 757 fleets, but neither comes close to Delta's numbers, and several international carriers, along with most cargo operators outside of dedicated freighter conversions, have already retired theirs entirely in favor of newer long-range narrow bodies. A handful of leisure and charter carriers in Europe have kept small numbers around for niche routes, but none of them have built an entire transatlantic strategy on the type the way Delta has. That makes Delta the industry's clearest test case for how long a 757 can realistically keep working. If the math on flying 40-year-old jets on transatlantic routes holds up for another decade, Delta proves it can be done. If it doesn't, Delta absorbs the cost, because there's barely anyone left flying enough of them to share the pain. But here's the twist that keeps this from being a straightforward decline story. Delta's transatlantic network, much of it still leaning on the 757's unique short runway range trick, remains one of the airline's most profitable segments, and Delta has posted some of its strongest financial results in company history in recent years. The 757 isn't dead weight, it's still opening routes competitors simply can't fly nonstop. Delta executives haven't signaled any rush to retire the type either, and the retrofit program suggests a fleet built to keep earning for years yet, not one being quietly wound down. Meanwhile, Delta isn't ignoring the future. It holds firm orders for the Airbus A321XLR, with deliveries expected to grow steadily, plus newer 737ME-X aircraft filling out the rest of the narrow-body fleet for routes that don't need the 757 specific trick. Delta has been careful not to frame any of this as an emergency either, choosing instead to talk about the 757, the way you'd talk about a proven paid-off asset rather than a liability waiting to be written down. The plan looks less like denial and more like a bridge. Keep the 757s flying and profitable on the routes only they can serve, while newer long-range narrow bodies slowly take over everywhere else. My own read on this is that it's not an airline stuck in the past, it's an airline squeezing every year it can out of a jet nobody else can build anymore, while the replacement finally arrives in meaningful numbers. So let's run this down. Delta operates more Boeing 757s than any airline in history, a jet whose production line shut for good back in 2004. The rest of the industry moved toward newer, more efficient narrow bodies, and Boeing never built a true one-for-one successor to the 757's short runway. Long-range combination that leaves Delta holding a fleet it can't easily replace, can't easily sell, and can't order more of. Add up the retrofit spending, the fuel penalty, the rising maintenance bill on an aging fleet, and a resale market that keeps thinning out, and the long-term cost of keeping these jets flying does climb toward that $12 billion figure analysts point to. And yet Delta keeps posting strong results, with the 757 still pulling real weight on routes nothing else in the fleet can fly. So is this a smart, patient fleet strategy, or the most expensive holdout in the sky? We probably won't know for certain until the A321XLR is flying in real numbers and the oldest 757s are pushing 45. So what do you think? Is Delta making the smartest call in the industry by squeezing every last mile out of the 757? Or is this simply the biggest sunk cost hiding in plain sight? Drop your take in the comments below and subscribe for more deep dives into the story shaping the skies. See you next time.